This chilling list begins with Israel Keys in at number 10. Israel Keys was captured in October of 2012 because he was suspected of kidnapping and murdering a teenage girl from Alaska. While he was interrogated for hours and hours, he revealed a lot to the investigators.
Smart, I would let them come to me. Just remote area.
He admitted to committing a bunch of violent crimes that started as early as 1996. He confessed to killing at least 8 people and sexually violating them. He was being held in custody as he waited for his trial to start, but he committed suicide in prison. He left a suicide note under his bed that said, "Ode to murder," but it didn't give police insight into the other killings that he confessed to. Up next, number 9, we have Edward Edwards.
Murder committed there in Geauga County, and I'm responsible for it, and I am wanting the death penalty.
Between the years of 1977 and 1996, he murdered at least 5 people, but it is suspected that he killed several more. There are even theories that link Ed Edwards to a variety of famous crimes. He was even suspected of being the Zodiac Killer, or that he was the Golden State Killer. He was sentenced to death after he confessed to killing at least 5 people, but he died in prison of natural causes a month later. But as you saw from the clip, he wanted the death penalty because he couldn't get killing out of his mind. David Zink makes his mark in at number 8.
Look up. She said, "Up where?" I said, "Up there." When she looked up, I broke her neck.
Okay. How did you do that?
Just snapped her with your hands, yeah.
This guy was seriously a sadistic killer. He had confessed to tying a young woman to a tree in a cemetery, breaking her neck, and slicing her spinal cord to ensure that she wouldn't live. Investigators said that this killing was an unspeakable act of violence. So after his confession, he was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. In his final statement before death, he said that death by lethal injection is better than spending the rest of your life in prison. He also apologized to the victim's family and said that he hopes his execution will bring them the peace and satisfaction they seek. He was just a twisted and sick individual, and I think I'm glad they gave him the death penalty. Gerard Murray stabs his way into this list at number 7.
Shot once, missed. Shot a second time, hit. He was driving 10-15 miles an hour, so it was rather slow. Ran around the hood of the car. I heard him gurgling, so I shot him again and then shoved him down in the ditch.
Gerard Murray also told the investigators that he wanted to show what it felt like to kill someone, and just hours after he confessed to the brutal murder, he was arrested in 2012. He was charged with first-degree murder after he shot his college classmate, General Sanchez, who was 18 years old at the time. In one of his other statements, he said to the court that he doesn't know when he might hurt someone again, and that he always thinks about hurting someone else. He also told the judge that he doesn't feel any remorse for killing, but he was found not guilty because of insanity. Michael Hernandez brings us to number 6. He was a teenager who was sentenced to life in prison for brutally stabbing one of his classmates, and this occurred at a middle school. He was only 14 years old when he committed the murder, and there was a ton of evidence presented at the trial that showed he was obsessed with becoming a serial killer.
I took the knife out and I proceeded to slit his throat.
Did Jamie say or do anything? Did he put up a struggle?
Yes, he did. He turned around after I did that. He asked me not to kill him.
However, Michael was granted a new sentencing after the US Supreme Court in 2012 banned automatic life terms without the possibility of parole for minors convicted of murder. So what does that mean? His case will be under the judicial review, which means he has the possibility of being released from prison because he would have served a total of 25 years. Okay, brace yourselves for number 5 because we have a very sadistic serial killer.
You don't feel bad about killing anyone?
Not personally, that I've personally done myself, no.
Okay, that was John Hughes. He is a self-confessed serial killer who admitted to police that he killed a truck driver in 2008, but he also later confessed to a reporter that he has killed many more people as well.
People in Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio.
As far as the murders that I've been a part of, but there's been quite a few.
A dozen?
At least.
20?
Under.
So more around the 15?
somewhere around in there.
Is this real life right now? And if that wasn't scary enough, take a look at this.
I wouldn't advise anyone to, I mean, not unless they want a lion loose in the streets.
Because you kill again.
More than positive.
Well, I think for the safety of society in general, he is going to be locked up for a very long time. Moving things along, in at number 4, we have Ed Kemper.
Back then, in 1972 and 73, unable to live with the fact that I just stabbed to death and cut the throat of an innocent young woman.
This man is responsible for the brutal slaying of 10 people, including his grandparents and even his own mother. He said that he engaged in many acts of necrophilia, and he said that he has even eaten flesh of one of his victims. I mean, this guy needs some serious psychiatric counseling if that would even help him. There's probably no help for this guy. When he was a little boy, he would decapitate his sister's dolls and even stalked his 2nd grade teacher with a knife. And at the age of 10 years old, he killed the family cat, and when he was 13 years old, he did it again. This time he kept pieces of the animals in his closet until his mother found them. Those are some serious red flags, and I think it's safe to say that he was not only insane, but he was deranged as well. Robert Pickton confesses in at number 3.
Make things disappear. I was making my work. Making that's what I was slapping people for.
The serial killer Robert Pickton was filmed admitting to 49 murders to an undercover policeman, and he even said that he wanted to do one more to just make it, an even 50. This is sick. In the video, you could tell that he was disappointed, that he was just one away from killing 50 people. He actually butchered his victims on his farm located near Vancouver, Canada. He would lure sex workers to his farm with drugs and alcohol before he murdered them and fed the remains to his pigs, or he would grind them up, mix them with animal meat, and then he would sell it to the public. Some of the women were injected with antifreeze while others were stabbed to death. He admitted that the reason why he was arrested was because he was getting too sloppy. Things get even more scarier with this next one. We have the BTK confessions in at number 2.
Put a plastic bag over his head and then some cords and then tighten it.
The BTK killer was Dennis Rader, and BTK stands for blind, torture, or kill, because that was his preferred method of killing his victims. Between the years of 1974 and 1991, he killed 10 people in Kansas, and he was notoriously known for sending taunting letters to the police and newspapers that described the gory details of each of his murders. Well, after a decade-long hiatus, he began sending letters to the police in 2004, which led to his eventual arrest and guilty confession.
Strangling, either the variant broke or he broke his bonds and he jumped up real quick like. I pulled my gun and quickly shot him. I hit him in the head. He fell over. I could see the blood, and as far as I'm concerned, I thought he was down. So
he's currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences at a maximum security prison in Kansas. So just in case this guy was able to live to like 1,000 years old, they got him booked in prison. He's never leaving. And now, topping this freaky list, in at number 1, we have Jeffrey Dahmer.
And his chest was bruised and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed. And I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have.
He has a very morbid and long confession list that includes rape, murder, and dismemberment of 17 men and boys from 1978 to 1991. I'm not sure how something like that goes on for that long. He also liked to indulge in necrophilia, cannibalism, and he would preserve the body parts in his freezer. He was sentenced to 16 terms of life imprisonment, but he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution, and that was back in 1994 because the inmate couldn't stand his sadistic humor. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most recognized serial killers because of his gruesome killing techniques. He used to drill holes in the heads of his victims while they were drugged up but still alive, and then he would pour a hydrochloric acid into their brains. Who the heck would think of doing something like this? Starting off this list, number 10, we have Natavia Lowry. Back on October 30th, 2007, a U.S. estate agent, Linda Steen, confronted her personal assistant. Her personal assistant is Ms. Natavia Lori, and she confronted her about $30,000 that had gone missing. But instead of calmly confessing to embezzling money, she bludgeoned her boss to death with a metal rod. The two of them wrestled for a bit until Natavia got hold of a deadly weapon and hit her 25 times until her boss was dead.
Snatched it from her, so I took it and it's like, I just hit her with it.
Where about her body?
Like, right here. I was mad, I was confused, I was angry, paranoid. It was like, feeling like I never had before.
Yeah, she seemed remorseful in her confession, but as soon as she murdered her boss, she didn't call for help. Instead, she checked Linda's pants and stole her debit card and also $800 in cash. Is this real life right now? That is just savage. John Paul Saliski brings us to number 9. He was arrested on first-degree murder charges for the death of a 44-year-old man who was randomly targeted while he was out jogging. Saliski told police that he was in a car with a rifle and he was depressed because his marriage was failing and he was contemplating committing suicide. But then he saw a man run past his vehicle and that's when he took his first shot. He told police that he just kept shooting this man until he just lost count.
And then he drowned, and I shot him again and again.
He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and I guess you can bet he'll also be served with divorce papers. At number 8 we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer. She was a nurse at a long-term care home, but she did the opposite of taking care of them. She killed several of her patients by injecting them with massive amounts of insulin. She told police that she picked up insulin because it isn't as heavily tracked as narcotics, so it was easier to get away with it. And every patient that she picked had some form of dementia, so they wouldn't be able to report her or question what she was doing. She also told the police that she would get an urge in the pit of her stomach that would tell her to kill a patient during her shift. I mean, what the heck?
Tell me a little bit about Gladys. What was she like when you cared for her?
Well, when I first started caring for her, she was walking and talking, and she had quite the spirit. She once punched a man.
Oh.
Because she overheard the nurses telling one of the gentlemen, no, you can't push your wife around, you have to come with us. And she turned around and she said, you can't treat a woman like that. Boom!
So she pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Jake Evans slips into this list at number 7. This teenager from America told the media that he killed his mother and sister after being inspired by the Halloween movie franchise. He was only 17 years old when he shot his family because he wanted to see if he could feel any remorse after he brutally killed them. He also had plans to kill his grandparents who lived across the street, and he told the police that he had 2 other sisters that he also planned on murdering as well. I mean, wow, talk about family issues. Here's a 911 phone call that he made. And I must warn you guys, brace yourselves because it's pretty disturbing.
I just killed my mom and my sister.
You just killed your mother and your sister? How did you do that?
I shot him with a .22 revolver.
It sounds pretty cold and emotionless, and he even stated that he didn't even have a reason for killing them. Let's move on to number 6 with Alonzo Perez. So the majority of these clips are people confessing to a gruesome murder or some other horrible crime. But for Alonzo, his silence says it all. Take a look at this. I think Alonzo knows he's in deep doo-doo because he can't wait around for his lawyers, so he's attempting to break out of police custody. Yeah, cause that's always a great idea. He actually managed to Houdini himself and freed himself from his handcuffs, and then he had the brilliant idea of escaping through the ceiling. I don't even think there needs to be a trial. This guy's guilty as hell. Well, after he successfully escaped from the police custody, he was shortly arrested, and I hope that the police use stronger handcuffs this time. Make sure it's the Houdini-proof handcuffs. Like glue his hands together or something. Climbing up this list, at number 5 we're talking about Siang-Hu Chu. On April 16, 2007, Chu began his killing spree that would later be known as the Virginia Tech Massacre. Well, he killed 2 students in their dorm room and then went to a classroom building and started shooting students and faculty members. In total, he murdered 32 people and injured a ton of others. The spree ended when Chu turned the gun on himself. But before he committed committed his mass murder, he went to the post office and he actually mailed a package to NBC News that had video clips and photos of him actually planning this attack.
I didn't have to do this. I could have left. I could have fled. But now, I will no longer run. You know lives as you can, just because you can. You had everything you wanted. Your Mercedes wasn't enough, you brats.
Daniel Wozniak creeps onto this list at number 4.
I'm crazy and I did it.
You did what?
I killed Julie and I killed Sam.
Okay. Tell me how you killed Sam.
This is a pretty messed up story. Daniel Wozniak was set to get married, but they were broke. So he devised a plan to kill his friends for money. So on May 21st, 2010, he lured his friend to a training base and then shot and killed him. He returned to the scene of the crime to cut off his head, hands, and forearms in order to toss them into a park, to throw police off his trail. He lured another friend, shot and killed her, and pulled her pants down to make it look like his other friend had killed and sexually assaulted her. What the heck goes on in people's minds? I mean, this is a pretty elaborate plan that will never work. It's so messed up. He later confessed to the killings, and the jurors only took 1 hour in their deliberations, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Next up, number 3, we have Jeremy Cancel. During his confession tape, he told police that he killed a student back in 2008 because he was bored.
I grabbed a plastic bag and I put it in his mouth, and I held his nose with a pillow over his face, with my knee on him, and I finished strangulating him.
Probably his body.
Originally, he went out to plan a robbery so that he can get money to buy some drugs, but instead he ran into a drunk student and convinced him to bring him to his apartment. Once he fell asleep, Cancel stole his laptop and other electronics, but he wasn't quite finished there. He took an electronic cable and strangled the man to death while watching the horror movie Hostel, and get this, once he was sentenced to life in prison, he laughed like a maniac in the courtroom. Checkington Sinclair brings us to number 2 on our list. He fatally shot his pregnant wife in the head before he calmly decided to call 911.
A murder has been committed.
Oh, a murder has been committed? By who?
By me, ma'am.
By you?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you murder? You shot her? Where'd you shoot her?
I shot her in the head.
Is this real life right now? He told the 911 operator that he got into a heated argument with his wife and she came at him with a knife. So he had no choice but to defend himself, so that's when he shot her. But the police weren't buying it. They weren't buying this story. They believed that he placed the knife there to make it look like it was a self-defense, and he even admitted later on that he wanted his wife to die. And now at number 1, we have Christian Romero. This next story is absolutely tragic. On November 5th, 2008, an 8-year-old boy shot his father with a .22 caliber rifle, and he also fatally shot a family friend.
I went upstairs and then I saw my dad, and then I got the gun, and then I fired it at my dad. He was on the ground, and then I reloaded it. I think I shot my dad because he was suffering, I think. I think I thought he was suffering. Okay. So I might have shot him.
Okay, that makes sense.
I didn't want him to suffer.
This double homicide makes Christian Romero one of the youngest killers in America. Because of his age, the judge sentenced him to spend time at a treatment unit, and he'll have the chance to get out on probation when he turns 18 years old. But he will have to continue getting psychological evaluations to make sure that he isn't a danger to society. Number 10, we have Danta Wright, who is this 17-year-old teenager who admitted to shooting Jordan Klee right in the head. This confession was shocking, and it was right in front of Jordan Klee's mom, which makes it really sad. During this whole conviction and sentencing, Danta had a big smile on his face, and because of that, it almost cost him his plea deal. Because of the plea deal, he got 25 to 53 years in prison. Maybe over that time you can figure out why this wasn't a joking matter and why he shouldn't think that this whole situation was funny. You know, it's funny to shoot someone in the head and then to tell the shocking confession right in front of the victim's mom.
What did you do with that gun and Mr. Jordan Klee?
Shot him.
And where did you shoot him?
On the top. His head.
And did you kill him with that shot?
Yes.
Now at number 9, we have a Marine wife's murder. A former Marine shocked the courtroom during his murder trial when he admitted to strangling the wife of another Marine and pushing her head first down on an abandoned mine shaft in a remote California desert. He initially pleaded not guilty, but after a 2-month search, he said that people have to know what he did. He said he made the decision to kill her because he was controlled by anger. He claimed that she molested one of his family members. Number 8, we have 49-year-old Richard Houghton, who admitted in court that he is a rapist and that he raped a 17-year-old and he knew that she was underage, and he was quite proud of it actually. When he was asked by the prosecutors, did you know that she was a minor? He said yes. He said he lost his head and he actually killed 17-year-old Tara Willenberg, which is just so disturbing. In court, this guy seems so calm, like he just doesn't care. Richard is already a convicted sex offender, so I'm not sure why he's currently out of jail and why he had the opportunity to do this again. Clearly, he was still in contact with the minors. Condolences goes out to this little girl's family, friends, and loved ones. And my condolences goes out to all the victims on this list. Number 7, we have another very shocking confession in court. 33-year-old John Hughes in court admitted to killing a truck driver. John was being convicted for this one murder, but it was shocking to hear that he actually admitted that there were other people as well. He was caught for one, but he admitted that there were many more out there. In court, he was asked, did you feel remorse? And he said no. He said, would he do it again? And John said his brain works differently and he just wants to kill people, and right now he just wants to die. Listen to what he said when he was asked, how many people have you killed?
As far as the murders that I've been a part of, but there's been quite a few.
A dozen?
At least.
20?
Under.
Somewhere around the 15?
Somewhere around in there.
It's always disturbing watching these confessions because you just don't know what is going to be said next. How has this guy killed that many people, and it's just now that he's getting caught? Because he confessed to never not killing people, he will be behind bars for the rest of his life. Alright, number 6, we have a confession from 13-year-old Alex King. This teenager was on trial for murdering his father. Alex killed his father Terry alongside his 14-year-old brother Derek King, who joined in as well on the killing. And they used a baseball bat before setting their home on fire. In court, Alex King made a shocking confession as a plea deal. As a plea deal, the teens received 22 years to life without parole, as well as up to 30 years for arson. Jalel Smith Riley comes into this disturbing and shocking list at number 5. Jalel is 23 years old and he was convicted of attempted robbery that turned into murder. Jalel in court was pleading not guilty during his trial, but something shockingly happened halfway through the sentencing. Jalel out of nowhere confessed to murder and tried to get a plea deal. As soon as Jalel confessed, he broke down crying like crazy in the courtroom. This came as a huge shock because this was a 3-year-old murder case that has been ongoing, and finally he confessed to the crime he committed. The family felt a little bit better and they felt a little bit relieved from this case because they said that this is the first step of healing, but they do want Jalel to get a life sentence.
The Ohio Department of Corrections, mandatory and consecutive underlying offenses, all those counts are consecutive each other. Colgan credit for time served amount of 349 days.
Number 4, we have 76-year-old Fraser Glenn Miller Jr., who was accused of killing 3 people at Overland Park Jewish Community Center near Kansas City. The court wanted to make sure that Fraser knew what happened and that he killed 3 people in this racist attack. Well, in court, Fraser was just supposed to be present, not testify, he wasn't supposed to speak. Well, on his way out of the courtroom, he said this.
I attacked the Jewish Center of Jews against genocide against white people. I have a right.
These crimes took place in 2014, and right now he's on death row, and he's expected to die by lethal injection. Number 3, we have Lawrence Bittaker. Lawrence, alongside Roy Lewis Norris, were known as the Toolbox Killers after a series of killings and rapes that occurred in a period of 5 months in Southern California back in 1979. Lawrence, when he was caught, confessed to kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder of 5 teenage girls.
Lawrence Bittaker, with an IQ of 138, dragged high school girls into his van, then murdered them by twisting a coat hanger around their throat with a pair of pliers.
Number 2, listen to this.
Shot once, missed.
Shot a second time, he was driving 10, 15 miles an hour, so it was rather slow. Ran around the hood of the car. I heard him gurgling, so I shot him again and then shoved him down in the ditch.
When this guy was asked what should his prison sentence be, he replied with the death sentence. The officers questioning him asked, well, why is that? And then the killer said, well, it's an eye for an eye. The most shocking thing about this case might be the sentencing. The killer was found not guilty by reasoning of insanity. This is actually a new law in place just weeks before this case happened. So this killer was sentenced to a hospital and not to a prison. Finally, at number 1, we have Steven Sanderson, who admitted to killing his cellmate, but he was very proud of it, and that's why he wanted to confess what he did to the courts and plead guilty to the murder charge. Steven killed Theodore because he said he was a child molester. Steven told the judge that he actually wanted to explain in detail the whole situation.
That night he was trying to justify why he did it, and I just told him to be quiet and he would have to leave in the morning to find a new cell, but he continued to talk about it and try to justify it. So he was a little bit bigger than me, so I got down and I hit him in his face a few times, and when he fell, I wrapped a cord around his neck and I took his life.
I mean, that is just absolutely insane. Is this real life right now? Steven is already serving life without parole. Something tells me that those types of people should be like isolated from everyone else, because what else do these guys have to lose? He already is in life in there, so why not just kill more and more people who bug him? Starting things off, number 10, we have Robert Elton Harris. He said, you can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper. He was arrested on July 5th in 1978 when him and his brother hijacked a car with 2 teenage boys in it. They ordered them to drive to a remote location where the brothers brutally murdered them, and then they used the vehicle as a getaway car when they robbed a San Diego bank. Robert Harris was arrested just 1 hour after the robbery, and he was charged with murder and auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. One of the arresting officers was the father of one of the murdered boys, but he didn't realize that the victim was his son until later. He wasn't even able to recognize his son's face. That's how violent the murder was. Robert Harris was sentenced to death in 1979. After many appeals, he was finally executed in San Quentin's gas chamber on April 21st, 1992. Moving up this list with George Engel in at number 9. He was an anarchist who didn't like to follow any sort of rules or regulations. He was involved with a lot of activism and protests in the Chicago area. A protest bombing took place in Haymarket Square in Chicago that resulted in the death of 7 police officers, 4 civilians, and a lot of other people who were seriously injured. George Engel was actually at home playing cards while this riot broke out, and he was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy in the bombings. He was convicted and sentenced to hanging, but before he took his last breath, he said, "Hurrah for anarchy. This is the happiest moment of my life." Roger Keith Coleman makes his last statement in at number 8. His case gained nationwide attention and major controversy because he maintained his innocence the whole time during his conviction and even right before he was executed. During his final last words, he said, "An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope Americans will realize the injustice of the death penalty as all other civilized countries have." He was convicted in Virginia for assaulting and murdering his sister-in-law on the day that he has been laid off from work. After his death, the DNA evidence was reanalyzed, and in January 2006, the governor announced that the testing of the DNA evidence has conclusively proven that he was guilty of the crime. Okay, that's great and all, but why don't you think you should have done 1,000 tests on the DNA before you executed him? It makes no sense. What if the DNA evidence proved that he wasn't guilty? What would the press conference look like then? Oops, we made a massive mistake and killed an innocent man. My bad. And now at number 7, we have Timothy McVeigh. He infamously said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." If you guys remember, he was the one behind the Oklahoma City bombing, which killed 168 people and injured over 680 others. This bombing is actually the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the United States. His execution date was set for June 11, 2001, and he made a request to have it publicly televised, but this motion was denied. He invited a composer to perform classical music on the night of his execution, and he requested to have a Catholic chaplain. He also requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his last meal. He was executed by lethal injection, and his wait to be executed was way shorter than most inmates waiting on death row. He only spent about 4 years on death row, while most inmates spend an average of 15 years. The infamous Jeffrey Dahmer is next up at number 6. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms for murdering 17 men and boys in the Milwaukee area, and this is between 1978 and 1991. He was also heavily into necrophilia, and he kept his victims' body parts in the freezer so that he can just eat them later. The interesting part of this story is that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't given the death penalty. His inmate actually beat him to death because he said that Jeffrey Dahmer was a sick and creepy man. And yeah, he was. He used to make this person food look like human body parts, and he would cover them in ketchup to resemble blood. So according to Jeffrey Dahmer's murderer, his last words were, "I don't care if I live or die, go ahead and kill me." And now at number 5 we have Tom Blackjack Ketchum. He was an outlawed cowboy who murdered someone in 1895. After that, his gang fled to New Mexico, where they committed more robberies before he was captured during an unsuccessful attempt to rob a train. He was quickly arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death by hanging. When his execution date arrived, it was the biggest public display in the area because he was the first person to be hanged for a train robbery in New Mexico. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Before he was hanged, he said this, "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast, boys, let her rip." And right after that, he said the rope completely decapitated him, and it is said that his headless body landed on its feet and stayed standing upright for quite some time. John Wayne Gacy had 3 famous last words, and this comes into number 4. He kept it short and sweet when he said, "Kiss my ass." I don't know about you guys, but I think I would have, a lot more to say for my final words than "kiss my ass." But then again, he was a textbook serial killer who didn't really have any emotions. He was known as the Killer Clown because he used to dress up as Pogo the Clown and perform at many charitable events and birthday parties. He took the lives of at least 33 young boys in Illinois, and he would bury their bodies underneath his home. So when he was convicted of sexual assault in 1968, the police were able to find all of the dead bodies that he tried to cover up. Despite a bunch of corpses being found underneath his own home, he maintained his innocence. But he was found guilty in 1980 because there was just so much compelling evidence against him. He was given multiple death penalties and life sentences, and finally, after being on death row for 14 years, he was executed by lethal injection. Aileen Wuornos is up next at number 3. Aileen had a terrible childhood that was full of abuse and abandonment, so it's almost no surprise that she went on a killing rampage that would define her as America's most infamous female serial killer. She worked as a prostitute, and she killed 7 men that picked her up along the highway. Aileen said that all of her murderers were out of self-defense, but she was also convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. She was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, but before she died, she said this, "I just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June the 6th. Like the movie, big mothership of all, I'll be back." I don't even know what this even means, but I am pretty scared. And June 6th, what happens on June 6th? Carl Panzram's last words makes it onto this list at number 2. You probably don't recognize his name, but he is actually known as one of the most sadistic American serial killers of all time. He had more than a dozen aliases, and no one knew anything about what he has done for years until he was captured in November 1928. Before his death, he confessed to killing 21 people and sexually harming 1,000 males. Is this real life right now? And right before he was hanged, he said, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 1,000 male human being. That is just sickening, and for all those reasons, I'm not the least bit sorry for this guy. The Vampire of Dusseldorf falls onto our list at number 1. He is known as a vampire because he would occasionally attempt to drink the blood from his victims' wounds while they were still alive. But eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death by beheading because he committed a series of murders and sexual assaults. He even admitted to killing a 9-year-old girl. It is confirmed that he murdered at least 9 people, but the police suspected that he brutally murdered a lot more people. So one evening before his death, he ordered a Wiener Schnitzel, a bottle of white wine, and fried potatoes, and the next morning he was taken to the guillotine to have his head chopped off. But before he left this world, he made one last scary statement that probably haunted the people that were at his execution. He said, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my head? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." I mean, yeah, after hearing that, I'm definitely gonna have nightmares, and if that wasn't enough, his mummified head is on display right now in a Wisconsin museum after doctors tried to cut it open to find reasons behind his evil. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And at number 10, we have a burning statement. Jose Villegas was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend, her young son, and her mother 13 years ago, and he was sentenced to be executed. He was also convicted for making terroristic threats to kill women, burglary, and possessing inhalants. His attorney argued that the stabbings weren't intentional because he was mentally ill. Keep in mind that the Supreme Court prohibits the execution of mentally impaired people, but the Supreme Court denied their appeals because they said that previous examinations of Jose Villegas showed no mental impairment. And they also argued that his lawyers had 10 years to bring up his mental impairment, but they didn't until just days before his scheduled execution. So as the medical technician inserted the lethal drug, he said, "It does kind of burn. Goodbye." He then gasped several times, his breathing started to get quieter, and within 1 minute, he stopped moving and his pulse stopped. Up next, number 9, we have an unusual statement. Richard Cobb said these last words before he was declared dead. "Wow, this is great. This is awesome. Thank you, Warden." Well, I think it's safe to say that his final statements was very odd. It seems like he actually was enjoying being executed.
Witnesses looking through the glass in a small confined room. He looked calm, looking up at the ceiling.
I mean, I expected him to have some remorse, which I didn't.
He didn't have any.
I didn't have any.
The witnesses in the room were left confused and unfulfilled. It's like he did this on purpose because he didn't want the victim's family to get closure. Richard Cobb actually spent a decade on death row for murdering a man who abducted and later killed during a convenience store robbery. After the drug entered his system, his head hit the pillow and his neck twisted with his mouth wide open. 15 minutes later, he was declared dead. Moving up this list, or down this list, depends on how you see it. At number 8, we have Joshua Bishop. During his final moments alive, he said, "I feel it. I don't know about you guys, but the statement gives me the chills. When I was reading inmates' last words, a lot of them actually say that they feel the drug entering their body and that they can feel that death is near. That is just something so unsettling about the statements that I cannot explain." On the night on June 24th, 1994, he had spent the night drinking and smoking crack with 2 other people. He tried to steal car keys from Leverett Morrison, who was sleeping at the time, but things didn't go according to plan. Joshua Bishop beat Leverett Morrison to death and dumped his body between 2 trash cans and burned his Jeep. He was arrested within 24 hours after the murder, and he quickly confessed and immediately began to show remorse. However, after the trial, he was convicted and sentenced to die by lethal injection. His lawyers tried to appeal this decision by saying that he is a reformed man and he has turned all of a sudden somehow into a model citizen. They even submitted written statements by the victim's family saying that they didn't want to have him executed, but all of the appeals were denied. A hellish statement makes its way onto this list at number 7. Lavinia Fisher said, "If you have a message and want to get it to hell, give it to me. I'll carry it." Is this real life right now? Well, I guess she knew exactly where she was heading. It wasn't up. It is argued that she is the first woman serial killer in the United States, and she was arrested and sentenced to death by hanging, but she never actually killed anyone. According to the story, Lavinia and her husband ran an inn just outside of Charleston. When a single person checked in, Lavinia would use her charm to gain their trust. Once they felt at ease with her, she would give them a cup of tea that was poisoned. Once the poison entered their body, the person would go to sleep and she would steal their possessions. It was actually her husband that did the stabbings, but as it turns out, she was arrested and hanged in 1820, and it is believed that her spirit still haunts the Old City Jail. Up next, number 6, we have James Jackson. Before he was executed, he said, "See you all on the other side. Warden murdered me. I am ready to roll. Time to get this party started." James Jackson was not a model citizen, that's for sure. He was a white supremacist who stabbed a 66-year-old black man to death with a sword in New York. He was quickly charged with second-degree murder as a hate crime, and when he was arrested, he told police that he hated black men for at least the past 10 years.
But Jackson allegedly told detectives he had bigger plans. Mr. Jackson regarded the killing as practice prior to going to Times Square to kill additional black men.
He was motivated by his strong hatred, and he fully intended on killing as many black men as he could. Well, thankfully he was caught and arrested before he was able to cause any more harm. Number 5 brings us over to George Harris, who made a disturbing last statement. He said, "Somebody needs to kill my trial attorney." After he won $500 on a craps game in Kansas, he exchanged his winnings for 2 machine guns, and then he had another man hold on to them for safekeeping. But when George Harris came back for his guns later that night, the man told them that he didn't know where they were, so he shot them dead with a revolver. There was just so many questions left unanswered, like why does one person need 2 machine guns, and who misplaced the deadly weapons? This is all very strange, but George Harris was eventually sentenced to death by lethal injection on September 13th, 2000, and apparently he wasn't happy with his lawyer's performance during the trial. Stephen Woods creeps onto this list at number 4. He was sentenced to the death penalty in Texas after a jury convicted him of capital murders of several drug dealers, even though someone else confessed to the killings. But Texas has an unusual law that allows a defendant to be put to death for a murder that someone else committed. He was given a lethal injection, but before he died, he said these final last words: "You're not about to witness an execution, you're about to witness a murder. I am strapped down for something that Marcus Rhodes did." After his final statement, he took several deep breaths before he stopped moving completely. Can you imagine being killed for a crime that you didn't directly commit? Yes, he was present during the murders, but he never actually killed anyone. Do you guys agree with the death penalty, or do you guys think that it's cruel and an unusual punishment? What if you never killed anyone, but you were still a part of it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, because I'm really curious. And now number 3, we're going to be talking about Jonathan Green's last words before death. This inmate used his last breath to maintain his innocence of the murder of a 12-year-old girl. He was arrested for abduction, sexual abuse, and strangulation of a young girl whose body was found at his home. His lawyer made several last-ditch efforts to have his death sentence reversed, but none of them were successful. Before he was given the lethal injection, the warden asked him if he had any last words, but he shook his head and said no. But just a few seconds later, he changed his mind and said, "I'm an innocent man. I never killed anyone. Y'all are killing an innocent man." I know that these last words are probably said a lot, but what if they weren't lying? What if they really were innocent? Now that we have better resources and more forensic analysis, it is believed that at least 4.1% of death row inmates would have been exonerated because this DNA evidence wasn't available to them at the time of their conviction. They were given the death penalty when they were actually innocent. We have another chilling statement coming in at number 2. Christina Marie Riggs was a single mother murder to 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby. On the outside, it looked like they were a beautiful family, but Christina Riggs had a dark secret. She was miserable and insecure. She complained about not having enough money to get by. That's when on November 4th, 1997, she did the unthinkable. She gave her son and daughter antidepressants in a cup in order to sedate them, and she injected her son with potassium chloride to put him to sleep. When that didn't work, she smothered them with a pillow. After she murdered her 2 children, she wrote suicide notes before she attempted to overdose on antidepressants. However, her suicide attempt failed, and she was found guilty and sentenced to death. Before her execution, she said, "There is no way words can express how sorry I am taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies as I always intended." She was executed by lethal injection with potassium chloride, which is the same heart-stopping drug she attempted to use on her children. And finally, number 1, we have Benny Demps. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection for murdering another inmate before he was killed. He blamed his executioners of butchering him with a needle. He said, "They butchered me back there. I was in a lot of pain. They cut me in the groin. They cut me in the leg. I was bleeding profusely." I'm not really sure what this guy is complaining about because they were about to kill him. Why does he care about anything at this time? So he also said, "This is not an execution, it is a murder." Apparently the medical technicians cut him several times as they were trying to insert the IV, and because he was just an inmate, they didn't treat him with any dignity or respect. Although he was a convicted murderer, and I don't know, I guess this is up for debate. What do you guys think? Do convicts who are about to be put to sleep, for a crime they committed, should they be treated right? Should they be treated the right way? I don't know. I don't think so. Well, this man is about to die anyway. Is he suffering enough? Should he be treated fairly as a human being up until death? So for his last meal, he ordered barbecue chicken and beef, french fries, salad, Spanish rice, cherry vanilla, and butter pecan ice cream. In at number 10 with Gary Gilmore. During a robbery, Gilmore shot a man twice in the head, even though he was cooperating with his demand. The next day, he attempted to rob a motel, and he ended up fatally shooting the manager in the head. He confessed to the police that he killed 2 people in cold blood, but he was only tried for one of the murders because there wasn't enough physical evidence against him for the other murder. I mean, what the heck? If someone admits to a crime, isn't that enough? Well, the judge sentenced him to a death penalty, and he had a choice of being executed by hanging or shot by a firing squad. I guess he's a fan of irony because he chose to get killed by a firing squad. And his infamous last words were, "Let's do it." Those definitely wouldn't be my final words. I'd probably be screaming. I think Nike must have been inspired by his final last words. Let's do it. Climbing up this list, and at number 9, we're talking about Erskine Childers. Now, I know what you guys must be thinking. Everyone on this list must have committed a horrible crime in order to get the death penalty. Well, he might be our one exception to this rule. Childers was actually an Irish author who wrote a lot of successful novels, but he also had a little bit of a dark side. He would smuggle guns into Ireland with his sailing yacht until he was caught and sentenced to death. I mean, this seems pretty harsh, but this was during the late 1800s. But what makes things even worse, he filed an appeal and it was pending when they executed him, which is highly illegal today. So before he was executed by a firing squad, he said, "Take a step forward, lads. It will be easier that way." I don't blame him for being bitter. I think this was a pretty cruel and unusual punishment for his crime. Number 8, we have Jimmy Glass, who said, "I'd rather be fishing." Yeah, no shit. I think I'd rather be in a cave of sleeping grizzly bears or at a One Direction concert than be on the chopping block about to die. It's like Jimmy doesn't really give a shit that he's about to die. I think he must have come to terms with his death because those definitely aren't inspiring or moving last words. I wonder what he picked to be engraved on his tombstone. "I'd rather be alive." But before you start feeling sorry for him, just know that he was a convicted murderer, so he had it coming. John Avalos Alba brings us to number 7. He was handed down the death penalty for fatally shooting his wife while he was out on bail for a child molestation charge. He was finally executed by lethal injection on May 25th, 2010. I bet the judge who set his bail was feeling really guilty for not setting it higher. So for his final statement on Earth, he said this airy line: "Okay, Warden, let's do it. I love ya. I can taste it already. I'm starting to go. I mean, that just gives me chills. I read that you can feel the cold rush of the lethal injection piercing through your veins. Probably the worst feeling ever. And of course, it's the last feeling ever. I don't know whether or not that's true, but I guess I don't care to know. And now, in at our number 6 spot, we have a really odd last words. James French was a convicted murderer, and he was actually the last person to be executed under Oklahoma's death penalty. He was a pretty violent man. He was already convicted to life in prison for murdering a man who had picked him up from hitchhiking, but he had the desire to die. So that's when he brutally murdered his cellmate in order to get the death penalty. As soon as he was prepped to be executed by the electric chair, he came up with these infamous last words. How's this for a headline? French fries. Do you guys get it? His last name was French, and he was about to get fried by the electric chair. I know I shouldn't be laughing, but it's a little clever. From one scary but clever final statement to another, and at number 5 is George Apple. He said, "Well, gentlemen, you are about to see a baked apple." I would like to think I was given the opportunity for a final statement. I would say something clever like this, but it's also pretty morbid if you think about it. So actually, maybe I would use the opportunity to say something wise. Well, thankfully, I don't really have to think about it because I don't intend to ever be on death row. But anyways, George Apple was originally sentenced to death for committing an evil murder, so I guess he had it coming. Now number 4 brings us to John Rook. In 1980, he kidnapped a 25-year-old nurse in a parking lot where she worked. She was taken to an empty field where she was abused and murdered by Rook. After the killing, he ran her body over with his car. I mean, wow, was that even necessary? After he was sentenced to death, he made several appeals, but they all failed. So on the day of his execution, he said, "Freedom! Freedom at last! It's been a good one. Well, I hope you enjoy your freedom, and I'm glad you won't be able to hurt anyone ever again." Tory Twain McNabb takes us to number 3 on our list. He was executed by lethal injection for killing a police officer back in 1997. His lawyers attempted to make an appeal stating that the state's execution methods was cruel and unusual, but the judge was pretty firm and declined their appeals. So during his final minutes, he said, "Mom, sis, look at my eyes. I got no tears. I am unafraid. To the state of Alabama, I hate you. I hate you. I hate you." And as the procedure began, he raised his middle finger to the police officers, and he actually died in that position. I mean, wow, what an honorable way to go. Not. And now at number 2 is Carlos Granados. During a heated argument with his girlfriend, he grabbed a large kitchen knife and stabbed her 3-year-old son. I mean, whoa, talk about anger management issues. And he also stabbed his girlfriend 30 times, but she survived and was able to testify against him in court. For his final meal, he requested fried chicken, pizza, and a soft drink. And right before he was given the lethal injection, he said, "Kathy, you know I never meant to hurt you. I gave you everything. And that's what made me so angry. But I never meant to hurt you. I'm sorry." Well, I think it's a little bit too late for an apology. I hope she didn't even show up to his execution. Topping off this morbid list, and at number 1, we have Peter Manuel. He is actually known as Scotland's worst serial killer ever. He was convicted of murdering a total of 7 people between the years of 1956 and 1958, but it is believed that he killed many more people. He was hanged at Glasgow's Barlinnie prison, and he was one of the last people to have ever been executed in these gallows ever since the death penalty was overturned. But before he stepped out to his death, he said, "Turn up the radio and I'll go quietly." There's just something about that statement that gives me the chills.